Northanger Abbey, Chapter the 5th. Catherine was not so much engaged at the theatre that evening in returning the nods and smiles of Miss Thorpe, though they certainly claimed much of her leisure, as to forget to look with an inquiring eye for Mr. Tilney in every box which her eye could reach. But she looked in vain. Mr. Tilney was no fonder of the play than the pump room. She hoped to be more fortunate the next day, and when her wishes for fine weather were answered by seeing a beautiful morning, she hardly felt a doubt of it. For a fine Sunday in Bath empties every house of its inhabitants, and all the world appears on such an occasion to walk about and tell their acquaintance what a charming day it is. As soon as divine service was over, the Thorpes and Allens eagerly joined each other, and, after staying long enough in the pump room to discover that the crowd was unsupportable, and that there was not a genteel face to be seen, which everybody discovers every Sunday throughout the season, they hastened away to the Crescent, to breathe the fresh air of better company. Here Catherine and Isabella, arm in arm, again tasted the sweets of friendship in an unreserved conversation. They talked much and with much enjoyment. But again was Catherine disappointed in her hope of re-seeing her partner. He was nowhere to be met with. Every search for him was equally unsuccessful. In morning lounges or evening assemblies, neither at the upper nor lower rooms, at dressed or undressed balls was he perceivable, nor among the walkers, the horsemen, or the curricle drivers of the morning. His name was not in the pump-room book, and curiosity could do no more. He must be gone from Bath, yet he had not mentioned that his stay would be so short. This sort of mysteriousness, which is always so becoming in a hero, threw a fresh grace in Catherine's imagination around his person and manners, and increased her anxiety to know more of him. From the Thorpes she could learn nothing, for they had been only 2 days in Bath before they met with Mrs. Allen. It was a subject, however, in which she often indulged with her fair friend, from whom she received every possible encouragement to continue to think of him, and his impression on her fancy was not suffered therefore to weaken. Isabella was very sure that he must be a charming young man, and was equally sure that he must have been delighted with her dear Catherine, and would therefore shortly return. She liked him the better for being a clergyman, for she must confess herself very partial to the profession, and something like a sigh escaped her as she said it. Perhaps Catherine was wrong in not demanding the cause of that gentle emotion, but she was not experienced enough in the finesse of love, or the duties of friendship, to know when delicate raillery was properly called for, or when confidence should be forced. Mrs. Allen was now quite happy, quite satisfied with Bath. She had found some acquaintance, had been so lucky too as to find in them the family of a most worthy old friend, and as the completion of good fortune, had found these friends by no means so expensively dressed as herself. Her daily expressions were no longer, "I wish we had some acquaintance in Bath." They were changed into, "How glad I am we have met with Mrs. Thorpe," and she was as eager in promoting the intercourse of the two families as her young charge and Isabella themselves could be, never satisfied with the day unless she spent the chief of it by the side of Mrs. Thorpe, in what they called conversation, but in which there was scarcely ever any exchange of opinion, and not often any resemblance of subject. For Mrs. Thorpe talked chiefly of her children, and Mrs. Allen of her gown. The progress of the friendship between Catherine and Isabella was quick as its beginning had been warm, and they passed so rapidly through every gradation of increasing tenderness that there was shortly no fresh proof of it to be given to their friends or themselves. They'd called each other by their Christian name, were always arm in arm when they walked, pinned up each other's train for the dance, and were not to be divided in the set. And if a rainy morning deprived them of other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. Yes, novels. For I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolitic custom so common with novel writers, of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works, and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, who, if she accidentally take up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages with disgust. Alas, if the heroine of one novel be not patronized by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? I cannot approve of it. Let us leave it to the reviewers to abuse such effusions of fancy at their leisure, and over every new novel to talk in threadbare strains of the trash with which the press now groans. Let us not desert one another. We are an injured body. Although our productions have afforded more extensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any other literary corporation in the world, no species of composition has been so much decried. From pride, ignorance, or fashion, our foes are almost as many as our readers. And while the abilities of the 900th abridger of the history of England, or of the man who collects and publishes in a volume some dozen lines of Milton, Pope, and Prior, with a paper from the Spectator and a chapter from Sterne, are eulogized by 1,000 pens, there seems almost a general wish of decrying the capacity and undervaluing the labour of the novelist, and of slighting the performances which have only genius, wit, and taste to recommend them. I am no novel reader. I seldom look into novels. Do not imagine that I often read novels. It is really very well for a novel. Such is the common cant. And what are you reading, miss? Oh, it is only a novel, replies the young lady, while she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. It is only Cecilia, or Camilla, or Belinda, or in short, only some work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humour, are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. Now, had the same young lady been engaged with a volume of the Spectator instead of such a work, how proudly would she have produced the book and told its name, though the chances must be against her being occupied by any part of that voluminous publication, of which either the matter or manner would not disgust a young person of taste. The substance of its papers so often consisting in the statement of improbable circumstances, unnatural characters, and topics of conversation, which no longer concern any one living, and their language too frequently so coarse as to give no very favourable idea of the age that could endure it. Northanger Abbey, Chapter the 6th. The following conversation, which took place between the two friends in the pump room one morning, after an acquaintance of 8 or 9 days, is given as a specimen of their very warm attachment, and of the delicacy, discretion, originality of thought, and literary taste which marked the reasonableness of that attachment. They met by appointment, and as Isabella had arrived nearly 5 minutes before her friend, her first address naturally was, "My dearest creature, what can have made you so late? I have been waiting for you at least this age." "Have you indeed? I am very sorry for it, but really I thought I was in very good time. It is but just 1. I hope you have not been here long." "Oh, these 10 ages at least. I am sure I have been here this half hour. But now, let us go and sit down at the other end of the room and enjoy ourselves. I have 100 things to say to you. In the first place, I was so afraid it would rain this morning just as I wanted to set off. It looked very showery, and that would have thrown me into agonies. Do you know I saw the prettiest hat you can imagine in a shop window in Milsom Street just now? Very like yours, only with coquelicot ribbons instead of green. I quite longed for it. But, my dearest Catherine, what have you been doing with yourself all this morning? Have you gone with Udolpho? Yes, I have been reading it ever since I woke, and I am got to the Black Veil. Are you indeed? How delightful! Oh, I would not tell you what is behind the Black Veil for the world. Are not you wild to know? Oh, yes, quite. What can it be? But do not tell me. I would not be told upon any account. I know it must be a skeleton. I am sure it is Laurentius's skeleton. Oh, I am delighted with the book. I should like to spend my whole life in reading it. I assure you. If it had not been to meet you, I would not have come away from it for all the world. Dear creature, how much I am obliged to you. And when you have finished Udolpho, we will read the Italian together, and I have made out a list of 10 or 12 more of the same kind for you. Have you indeed? How glad I am. What are they all? I will read you their names directly. Here they are in my pocket-book. Castle of Wolfenbach, Clermont, Mysterious Warnings, Necromancer of the Black Forest, Midnight Bell, Orphan of the Rhine, and Horrid Mysteries. Those will last us some time. Yes, pretty well, but are they all horrid? Are you sure they are all horrid? Oh yes, quite sure. For a particular friend of mine, Miss Andrews, a sweet girl, one of the sweetest creatures in the world, has read every one of them. I wish you knew Miss Andrews. You would be delighted with her. She is netting herself the sweetest cloak you could conceive. I think her as beautiful as an angel, and I am so vexed with the men for not admiring her. I scold them all amazingly about it. Scold them? Do you scold them for not admiring her? Yes, that I do. There is nothing I would not do for those who are really my friends. I have no notion of loving people by halves. It is not my nature. My attachments are always excessively strong. I told Captain Hunt at one of our assemblies this winter that if he was to tease me all night, I would not dance with him, unless he would allow Miss Andrews to be as beautiful as an angel. The men think us incapable of real friendship, you know, and I am determined to show them the difference. Now, if I were to hear anybody speak slightingly of you, I should fire up in a moment. But that is not at all likely, for you are just the kind of girl to be a great favourite with the men. Oh dear, cried Catherine, colouring, how can you say so? I know you very well. You have so much animation, which is exactly what Miss Andrews wants. For I must confess there is something amazingly insipid about her. Oh, I must tell you that just after we parted yesterday, I saw a young man looking at you so earnestly. I am sure he is in love with you. Catherine coloured and disclaimed again. Isabella laughed. It is very true, upon my honour, but I see how it is. You are indifferent to everybody's admiration, except that of one gentleman, who shall be nameless. Nay, I cannot blame you, speaking more seriously. Your feelings are easily understood. Where the heart is really attached, I know very well how little one can be displeased with the attention of anybody else. Everything is so insipid, so uninteresting, that does not relate to the beloved object. I can perfectly comprehend your feelings. But you should not persuade me that I think so very much about Mr. Tilney, for perhaps I may never see him again. Not see him again? My dearest creature, do not talk of it. I am sure you would be miserable if you thought so. No, indeed, I should not. I do not pretend to say that I was not very much pleased with him. But while I have Udolpho to read, I feel as if nobody could make me miserable. Oh, the dreadful black veil. My dear Isabella, I am sure there must be Laurentius' skeleton behind it. It is so odd to me that you should never have read Udolpho before. But I suppose Mrs. Morland objects to novels. No, she does not. She very often reads Sir Charles Grandison herself, but new books do not fall in our way. Sir Charles Grandison! That is an amazing horrid book, is it not? I remember Miss Andrews could not get through the first volume. It is not like Udolpho at all, but yet I think it is very entertaining. Do you indeed? You surprise me. I thought it had not been readable. But, my dearest Catherine, have you settled what to wear on your head tonight? I am determined, at all events, to be dressed exactly like you. The men take notice of that sometimes, you know. But it does not signify if they do, said Catherine, very innocently. Signify? Oh, heavens! I make it a rule never to mind what they say. They are very often amazingly impertinent, if you do not treat them with spirit and make them keep their distance. Are they? Well, I never observed that. They always behave very well to me. Oh, they give themselves such airs. They are the most conceited creatures in the world, and think themselves of so much importance. By the by, though I have thought of it 100 times, I have always forgot to ask you, what is your favourite complexion in a man? Do you like them best dark or fair? I hardly know. I never thought much about it. Something between both, I think. Brown. Not fair, and not very dark. Very well, Catherine. That is exactly he. I have not forgotten your description of Mr. Tilney. A brown skin with dark eyes and rather dark hair. Well, my taste is different. I prefer light eyes, and as to complexion, do you know, I like a sallow better than any other. You must not betray me, if you should ever meet with one of your acquaintance answering that description. Betray you? What do you mean? Nay, do not distress me. I believe I have said too much. Let us drop the subject. Catherine, in some amazement, complied, and after remaining a few moments silent, was on the point of reverting to what interested her at the time rather more than anything else in the world, Laurentius' skeleton, when her friend prevented her by saying, For heaven's sake, let us move away from this end of the room. Do you know there are 2 odious young men who have been staring at me this half hour? They really put me quite out of countenance. Let us go and look at the arrivals. They will hardly follow us there. Away they walked to the book, and while Isabella examined the names, it was Catherine's employment to watch the proceedings of these alarming young men. They are not coming this way, are they? I hope they are not so impertinent as to follow us. Pray let me know if they are coming. I am determined I will not look up. In a few moments, Catherine, with unaffected pleasure, assured her that she need not be longer uneasy, as the gentlemen had just left the pump-room. And which way are they gone? Said Isabella, turning hastily round. One was a very good-looking young man. They went towards the churchyard. Well, I am amazingly glad I have got rid of them. And now, what say you going to Edgar's buildings with me and looking at my new hat? You said you would like to see it. Catherine readily agreed. Only, she added, perhaps we may overtake the 2 young men. Oh, never mind that. If we make haste, we shall pass by them presently, and I am dying to show you my hat. But if we only wait a few minutes, there will be no danger of our seeing them at all. I shall not pay them any such compliment, I assure you. I have no notion of treating men with such respect. That is the way to spoil them. Catherine had nothing to oppose against such reasoning, and therefore, to show the independence of Miss Thorpe and her resolution of humbling the sex, they set off immediately as fast as they could walk, in pursuit of the 2 young men. Northanger Abbey, Chapter the 7th. Half a minute conducted them through the pump yard to the archway, opposite Union Passage, but here they were stopped. Everybody acquainted with Bath may remember the difficulties of crossing Cheap Street at this point. It is indeed a street of so impertinent a nature, so unfortunately connected with the great London and Oxford roads, and the principal inn of the city, that a day never passes in which parties of ladies, however important their business, whether in quest of pastry, millinery, or even, as in the present case, of young men, are not detained on one side or other by carriages, horsemen, or carts. This evil had been felt and lamented at least 3 times a day by Isabella since her residence in Bath, and she was now fated to feel and lament it once more. For at the very moment of coming opposite to Union Passage, and within view of the 2 gentlemen who were proceeding through the crowds and threading the gutters of that interesting alley, they were prevented crossing by the approach of a gig, driven along on bad pavement by a most knowing-looking coachman, with all the vehemence that could most fitly endanger the lives of himself, his companions, and his horse. "Oh, these odious gigs," said Isabella, looking up. "How I detest them!" But this detestation, though so just, was of short duration, for she looked again and exclaimed, "Delightful! Mr. Morland and my brother!" "Good heaven, 'tis James!" was uttered at the same moment by Catherine, and on catching the young men's eyes, the horse was immediately checked with a violence which almost threw him on his haunches, and the servant having now scampered up, the gentleman jumped out, and the equipage was delivered to his care. Catherine, by whom this meeting was wholly unexpected, received her brother with the liveliest pleasure, and he, being of very amiable disposition and sincerely attached to her, gave every proof on his side of equal satisfaction, which he could have leisure to do, while the bright eyes of Miss Thorpe were incessantly challenging his notice. And to her his devoirs were speedily paid, with a mixture of joy and embarrassment, which might have informed Catherine had she been more expert in the development of other people's feelings, and less simply engrossed by her own, that her brother thought her friend quite as pretty as she could do herself. John Thorpe, who in the meantime had been giving orders about the horses, soon joined them, and from him she directly received the amends which were her due, for while he slightly and carelessly touched the hand of Isabella, on her he bestowed a whole scrape and half a short bow. He was a stout young man of middling height, who, with a plain face and ungraceful form, seemed fearful of being too handsome, unless he wore the dress of a groom, and too much like a gentleman, unless he were easy where he ought to be civil, and impudent where he might be allowed to be easy. He took out his watch. "How long do you think we have been running it from Turbury, Miss Morland?" "I do not know the distance." Her brother told her that it was 23 miles. 23, cried Thorpe. 25 if it is an inch. Morland remonstrated, pleaded the authority of road books, innkeepers, and milestones, but his friend disregarded them all. He had a surer test of distance. "I know it must be 25, said he, "by the time we have been doing it. It is now 1:30. We drove out of the inn-yard at Turbury as the town clock struck 11. And I defy any man in England to make my horse go less than 10 miles in harness. That makes it exactly 25. "You have lost an hour," said Morland. "It was only 10 o'clock when we came from Turbury." 10 o'clock? It was 11, upon my soul. I counted every stroke. This brother of yours would persuade me out of my senses, Miss Morland. Do but look at my horse. Did you ever see an animal so made for speed in your life?" The servant had just mounted the carriage and was driving off. Such true blood! 3 hours and a half indeed, coming at only 23 miles. Look at that creature, and suppose it possible if you can. He does look very hot, to be sure. Hot? He had not turned a hair till we came to Walcot Church. But look at his forehead, look at his loins, only see how he moves. That horse cannot go less than 10 miles an hour. Tie his legs, and he will get on. What do you think of my gig, Miss Morland? A neat one, is it not? Well hung, town-built. I have not had it a month. It is built for a Christchurch man, a friend of mine, a very good sort of fellow. He ran it a few weeks till I believe it was convenient to have done with it. I happened just then to be looking out for some light thing of the kind, though I had pretty well determined on a curricle too. But I chanced to meet him on Magdalen Bridge as he was driving into Oxford last term. "Ah, Thorpe," said he, "do you happen to want such a little thing as this? It is a capital one of the kind, but I'm cursed tired of it." "Oh, damn," said I am your man. What do you ask?" "And how much do you think he did, Miss Morland?" "I'm sure I cannot guess at all." "Curricle hung, you see. Seat, trunk, sword case, splashing board, lamps, silver moulding, all, you see, complete. The ironwork as good as new or better. He asked 50 guineas. I closed with him directly, threw down the money, and the carriage was mine." "And I am sure," said Catherine, "I know so little of such things that I cannot judge whether it was cheap or dear." "Neither one nor t'other. I would have got it for less, I dare say, but I hate haggling, and poor Freeman wanted cash." "That was very good-natured of you," said Catherine, quite pleased. "Oh, damn it, when one has the means of doing a kind thing by a friend, I hate to be pitiful." An inquiry now took place into the intended movements of the young ladies, and on finding whether they were going, it was decided that the gentlemen should accompany them to Edgar's Buildings and pay their respects to Mrs. Thorpe. James and Isabella led the way, and so well satisfied was the latter with her lot, so contentedly was she endeavouring to ensure a pleasant walk to him who brought the double recommendation of being her brother's friends and her friend's brother, so pure and uncoquettish were her feelings, that, though they overtook and passed the two offending young men in Milsom Street, she was so far from seeking to attract their notice that she looked back at them only 3 times. John Thorpe kept, of course, with Catherine, and after a few minutes' silence renewed the conversation about his gig. "You will find, however, Miss Morland, it would be reckoned a cheap thing by some people, for I might have sold it for 10 guineas more the next day. Jackson of Oriel bid me 60 at once. Morland was with me at the time." "Yes," said Morland, who overheard this, "but you forget that your horse was included." "My horse! Oh, damn it, I would not sell my horse for 100. Are you fond of an open carriage, Miss Morland?" "Yes, very. I have hardly ever had an opportunity of being in one, but I am particularly fond of it." "I am glad of it. I will drive you out in mine every day." "Thank you," said Catherine, in some distress, from a doubt of the propriety of accepting such an offer. "I will drive you up Lansdowne Hill tomorrow." "Thank you, but will not your horse want to rest?" "Rest? He has only come 23 miles today. All nonsense. Nothing ruins horses so much as rest. Nothing knocks them up so soon. No, no, I shall exercise mine at the average of 4 hours every day while I'm here." "Shall you indeed?" said Catherine very seriously. "That will be 40 miles a day." 40? Aye, 50 for what I care. Well, I will drive you up Lansdowne tomorrow. Mind, I am engaged." "How delightful that will be!" cried Isabella, turning round. "My dearest Catherine, I quite envy you. But I am afraid, brother, you will not have room for a third." "A third, indeed? No, no, I did not come to Bath to drive my sisters about. That would be a good joke, faith. Morland must take care of you." This brought on a dialogue of civilities between the other two, but Catherine heard neither the particulars nor the result. Her companion's discourse now sunk from its hitherto animated pitch to nothing more than a short, decisive sentence of praise or condemnation on the face of every woman they met. And Catherine, after listening and agreeing as long as she could with all the civility and deference of the youthful female mind, fearful of hazarding an opinion of its own in opposition to that of a self-assured man, especially where the beauty of her own sex is concerned, ventured at length to vary the subject by a question which had long been uppermost in her thoughts. It was, "Have you ever read Udolpho, Mr. Thorpe?" "Udolpho? Oh, Lord, not I. I never read novels. I have something else to do." Catherine, humbled and ashamed, was going to apologise for her question, but he prevented her by saying, "Novels are all so full of nonsense and stuff. There has not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones, except The Monk. I read that t'other day, but as for all the others, they are the stupidest things in creation." I think you must like Udolpho if you were to read it. It is so very interesting. Not I, Faith. No, if I read any, it shall be Mrs. Radcliffe's. Her novels are amusing enough. They are worth reading. Some fun and nature in them. Udolpho was written by Mrs. Radcliffe, said Catherine with some hesitation from the fear of mortifying him. No, sure, was it? Aye, I remember, so it was. I was thinking of that other stupid book written by that woman they make such a fuss about. She who married the French emigrant. I suppose you mean Camilla. Yes, that's the book. Such unnatural stuff. An old man playing at seesaw. I took up the first volume once and looked it over, but I soon found it would not do. Indeed, I guessed what sort of stuff it must be before I saw it, as soon as I heard she had married an emigrant. I was sure I should not be able to get through it. I have never read it. You had no loss, I assure you. It is the horridest nonsense you can imagine. There is nothing in the world in it but an old man's playing at seesaw and learning Latin. Upon my soul, there is not. This critique, the justness of which was unfortunately lost on poor Catherine, brought them to the door of Mrs. Thorpe's lodgings, and the feelings of the discerning and unprejudiced reader of Camilla gave way to the feelings of the dutiful and affectionate son, as they met Mrs. Thorpe, who had described them from above in the passage. "Ah, mother, how do you do?" said he, giving her a hearty shake of the hand. "Where did you get that quiz of a hat? It makes you look like an old witch. Here is Morland and I come to stay a few days with you, so you must look out for a couple of good beds somewhere near." And this address seemed to satisfy all the fondest wishes of the mother's heart, for she received him with the most delightful and exulting affection. On his two younger sisters he then bestowed an equal portion of his fraternal tenderness, for he asked each of them how they did, and observed that they both looked very ugly. These manners did not please Catherine, but he was James's friend and Isabella's brother, and her judgment was further bought off by Isabella's assuring her, when they withdrew to see the new hat, that John thought her the most charming girl in the world, and by John's engaging her before they parted to dance with him that evening. Had she been older or vainer, such attacks might have done little, but where youth and diffidence are united, it requires uncommon steadiness of reason to resist the attraction of being called the most charming girl in the world, and being so very early engaged as a partner. And the consequence was, that when the two Morlands, after sitting an hour with the Thorpes, set off to walk together to Mr. Allen's, and James, as the door was closed on them, said, "Well, Catherine, how do you like my friend Thorpe?" Instead of answering, as she probably would have done, had there been no friendship and no flattery in the case, "I do not like him at all," she directly replied, "I like him very much. He seems very agreeable. He is as good-natured a fellow as ever lived. A little of a rattle, but that will recommend him to your sex, I believe. And how do you like the rest of the family?" "Very, very much indeed. Isabella particularly." "I am very glad to hear you say so. She is just the kind of young woman I could wish to see you attached to. She has so much good sense, and is so thoroughly unaffected and amiable. I always wanted you to know her, and she seems very fond of you. She said the highest things in your praise that could possibly be, and the praise of such a girl as Miss Thorpe, even you, Catherine," taking her hand with affection, "may be proud of." "Indeed I am," she replied. "I love her exceedingly, and am delighted to find that you like her too. You hardly mentioned anything of her when you wrote to me after your visit there." "Because I thought I should soon see you myself. I hope you will be a great deal together while you are in Bath. She is a most amiable girl, such a superior understanding. How fond all the family are of her. She is evidently the general favourite, And how she must be admired in such a place as this. Is not she? Yes, very much indeed, I fancy. Mr. Allen thinks her the prettiest girl in Bath. I dare say he does, and I do not know any man who is a better judge of beauty than Mr. Allen. I need not ask you whether you are happy here, my dear Catherine, with such a companion and friend as Isabella Thorpe. It would be impossible for you to be otherwise, and the Allens, I am sure, are very kind to you. Oh yes, very kind. I never was so happy before, and now you are come, it will be more delightful than ever. How good it is of you to come so far on purpose to see me." James accepted this tribute of gratitude, and qualified his conscience for accepting it too, by saying with perfect sincerity, "Indeed, Catherine, I love you dearly." Inquiries and communications concerning brothers and sisters, the situation was some, the growth of the rest, and other family matters, now passed between them, and continued, with only one small digression on James's part in praise of Miss Thorpe, till they reached Pulteney Street, where he was welcomed with great kindness by Mr. and Mrs. Allen, invited by the former to dine with them, and summoned by the latter to guess the price and weigh the merits of a new muff and tipper. A pre-engagement in Edgar's buildings prevented his accepting the invitation of one friend, and obliged him to hurry away as soon as he had satisfied the demands of the other. The time of the two parties uniting in the octagon room being correctly adjusted, Catherine was then left to the luxury of a raised, restless, and frightened imagination over the pages of Udolpho, lost from all worldly concerns of dressing and dinner, incapable of soothing Mrs. Allen's fears on the delay of an expected dressmaker, and having only 1 minute in 60 to bestow even on the reflection of her own felicity in being already engaged for the evening.